The visiting Alpha's hand closed around Aloan's wrist, and the Alpha King's wineglass cracked in his bare hand. 300 years had taught Aloan not to mistake Valerian's attention for affection, yet the sudden silence in the royal hall made even that certainty tremble. "Your Majesty?" Lord Garrick said, slowly releasing her. Valerian sat beneath the black iron crown of his ancestors, broad shoulders framed by dark royal armor and a heavy fur mantle, his long black hair falling past the collar. Beside him stood the empty Luna throne, as it had stood for every year Aloan had loved him. His expression revealed nothing. "She is not available for a claim," he said. Garrick blinked. "I was told she has no mate." "You were told correctly." The answer should have ended Aloan's foolish hope. Instead, Valerian's gaze settled on her for one unbearable heartbeat. "Choose someone else." Garrick bowed and withdrew. Conversation slowly returned, but Aloan could still feel curious eyes following her as she carried the silver tray toward the healer's table. 3 centuries, and she remained what the court had always called her, an omega useful enough to keep, insignificant enough to overlook. She had dressed wounds after border conflicts, held frightened children while healers worked, prepared medicines for soldiers who later became grandfathers, then names carved into memorial stone. The saplings she had helped plant beyond the western courtyard now towered above the palace walls. Kings in neighboring lands had died. Dynasties had changed. Valerian remained. So did she. And so did the terrible tenderness she had never managed to bury. Her fingers found the old moonsilver pendant at her throat. It was plain and worn, a gift from a healer long dead, worth almost nothing by court standards. Somehow, touching it always steadied her. 300 years without a Luna, a noblewoman whispered nearby. "He cannot leave that throne empty forever." Aloan kept walking. She had heard versions of the same conversation for centuries. Which princess would finally interest him? Which noblewoman possessed enough beauty, blood, or power to stand beside the most feared Alpha King in the realm? No one ever mentioned the Omega who knew how Valerian took his tea after council meetings, which shoulder troubled him after long rides, or how he went silent on the anniversary of his father's death. Aloan knew all of it. Knowing had never made her chosen. A bell sounded, calling the court toward the moonstone ceremony. Aloan joined the servants along the outer wall while Valerian approached the ancient silver-white stone at the center of the chamber. When he placed his palm against it, a thin crack appeared across its polished surface. Gasps moved through the room. Valerian withdrew his hand. For the first time that evening, something disturbed his composure. Not fear exactly. Recognition. His eyes immediately searched the hall and found Aloan. She felt the pendant against her chest grow strangely warm. Then the sensation vanished. Morkant, the royal oracle, stepped quickly between the king and the stone. "A flaw in the surface, Majesty." "Nothing more." Valerian did not answer. He was still looking at Aloan. She lowered her eyes first. Hope was dangerous precisely because it could survive on almost nothing. Later, as the court dispersed, Aloan crossed the eastern gallery carrying unused medicines back toward the infirmary. Valerian's voice stopped her. "Aloan." 300 years, and her name still sounded different when he spoke it. She turned. He stood alone beneath the torchlight, his red royal cloak trailing behind him. "Lord Garrick will not trouble you again." The quiet certainty in his voice unsettled her. "He wasn't troubling me." Valerian's jaw tightened. "He intended to claim you." Perhaps I would have said yes. Something fierce flashed across his face before disappearing behind the king again. Aloan's heart betrayed her with one hard beat. She hated herself for noticing. "Would that have mattered to you?" she asked softly. Valerian stared at her for so long that she almost believed 300 years were about to break open between them. Then he stepped back. "Stay where I know you are safe." There it was again. Not love. Not confession. A command disguised as concern. Aloan bowed because that was easier than allowing him to see disappointment return to its familiar place inside her. Of course, your majesty. She walked away without looking back. Had she turned, she would have seen Valerian watching until she disappeared around the corner, one hand clenched at his side as if letting her leave required effort. She would also have seen Morkant standing silently in the shadows behind him. And she might finally have wondered why a king who had refused to choose her for 300 years had never once allowed anyone else to choose her either. By morning, Lord Garrick had left the palace, and Aloan knew without asking whose decision had sent him away. The knowledge followed her through the infirmary as she measured herbs, replaced linen, and tried to convince herself that nothing had changed. Valerian had interfered before. Over 300 years, invitations had vanished, courtships had ended without explanation, and visiting alphas who showed interest in her had somehow discovered urgent reasons to return home. Aloan had always called it coincidence. After the look on Valerian's face the previous night, coincidence no longer felt convincing. That frightened her more than rejection ever had. Rejection was familiar. Hope could still destroy her. Near noon, Thora entered carrying a sealed message. The king wants you in the western chamber. Aloan looked up. Why? He did not explain. Valerian was standing beside a tall window when Aloan arrived. His black armor had been replaced by a dark tunic, but there was nothing less commanding about him. On the table lay a fragment of silver-white stone. Aloan recognized it immediately. The moonstone? A piece broke away this morning. His gaze moved to the pendant at her throat. Did anything happen to that last night? Her fingers instinctively covered it. It became warm for a moment. Valerian went completely still. When? When the stone cracked. He turned away too quickly. That reaction told her more than his silence. You know something. I know the moonstone has survived longer than either of us. That was not what I asked. His eyes returned to hers. For centuries, Aloan had lowered her gaze whenever those eyes became too intense. This time she did not. Something had shifted the night before. Perhaps it was only exhaustion. Perhaps she had finally grown tired of surviving on unanswered questions. Why did you send Garrick away? She asked. He was unsuitable. For whom? Valerian's expression hardened. Aloan. You have done this before. Silence answered her. Her pulse quickened. How many times? Enough. One word, quietly spoken, and suddenly 3 centuries rearranged themselves around her. She remembered an alpha from the northern valleys who had once brought her flowers, then departed without saying goodbye. A healer who had asked permission to court her and was transferred to another province. A widowed lord who had offered her a peaceful home beyond the mountains, only to withdraw the offer the following morning. Why? She whispered. Valerian stepped closer, then stopped himself several feet away. Because there are dangers you do not understand. Then explain them. Something almost desperate crossed his face. I cannot. Aloan gave a small, wounded laugh. Of course. She turned toward the door. Aloan. You cannot keep deciding which questions I am allowed to have. Stay where I know you are safe. The familiar words struck differently now. She looked back at him. Safe from what? Valerian had no answer he was willing to give. Aloan left before Hope could persuade her to invent one. Behind her, Valerian stared at the closed door until Morkant entered from the adjoining council room. You are losing control, the oracle said. Valerian's voice dropped. Be careful. Morkant approached the fragment of moonstone. A faint silver line pulsed through its center. The barrier has weakened again. Faster this time. Find the cause. You already know the cause. Valerian turned toward him. Morkant lowered his voice. Your attachment to the Omega is becoming dangerous. Valerian's expression went cold. Do not speak of her as though she were a disease. Morkant studied him carefully. Then stop behaving as though she matters more than the kingdom. That evening, Aloan stood alone in the old courtyard beneath trees she remembered planting as saplings. For the first time in centuries, she allowed herself to consider an impossible thought. What if Valerian's distance had never been indifference? She touched the moon-silver pendant. It felt warm again. Across the courtyard, through a high palace window, she saw Valerian standing before the cracked moonstone. His hand rested against its surface, but his eyes were fixed on her. Even from that distance, she felt the force of his attention. Then Morkant appeared beside him and drew the curtains closed. The following night, Alolan carried Thora's medicine toward the Western Council rooms when she heard Valerian's voice beyond a partially closed door. She would normally have passed without listening. Then Morkant spoke her name. Alolan stopped. "You cannot keep protecting Alolan while pretending she means nothing," the oracle said. A long silence followed. Alolan's fingers tightened around the medicine bottle. Then Valerian answered, and something in his voice made her forget how to breathe. "I have known for 300 years that Alolan is my true mate." The medicine bottle nearly slipped from her fingers. Alolan stood motionless outside the council chamber, staring at the narrow line of golden light beneath the door as if the stone floor had opened beneath her. Inside, Morkant answered in a controlled voice. "Then remember why you have spent 3 centuries denying the bond." Alolan could barely hear him over the pounding of her heart. 300 years. Valerian had known. Not suspected. Not wondered. Known. Memories rose with merciless clarity. The northern alpha whose flowers had stopped arriving. The healer transferred without warning. The widowed lord who had offered her a home and withdrawn it the next morning. Valerian standing across crowded halls, always watching when another man approached her. His repeated command to stay where he knew she was safe. She had mistaken every intervention for the distant concern of a king. Worse, she had mistaken every year of silence for proof that she was not enough. "The moonstone is failing," Valerian said behind the door. "And you still believe keeping her from me is the answer? It has protected this kingdom for 300 years. Has it?" Valerian's voice sharpened. "The barrier has never weakened this quickly." Morkant lowered his voice, forcing Alolan closer to hear. "If you claim her now, you risk everything your father left you. Your crown. Your people. Every pack under your protection." There was a long silence. Alolan waited for Valerian to speak her name again. She wanted him to say the oracle was wrong. She wanted 3 centuries of loneliness to have some explanation that did not make her feel foolish for every quiet hope she had buried. Instead Valerian said, "I will not gamble thousands of lives against what I want." What I want. The words should have comforted her. They did not. He wanted her. Somehow that hurt more than believing he never had. Alolan stepped backward before either man could discover her. The medicine in her hand suddenly felt absurd. Even now, she had been coming to care for people inside a palace where the greatest truth of her life had apparently been known by others and hidden from her. She returned the bottle to the infirmary without telling Thora why it had never reached the council chamber. Then she went to her room. It was a small chamber in the oldest servant's wing, filled with objects accumulated across an impossible lifetime. A carved wooden bird given to her by a child 200 years ago. A faded ribbon from a healer who had once called Alolan the daughter she never had. Letters from people whose grandchildren were now old. 3 centuries of remaining in one place because some part of her had always believed leaving Valerian would hurt more than staying unseen. She sat beside the narrow bed and pressed both hands over her face. There were no tears at first. Only questions. When had he known? Had he recognized her the first time they met? Had he watched her fall in love with him while already knowing the bond between them? Had he heard courtiers call her insignificant and remained silent because silence served some greater purpose? Her fingers found the moon-silver pendant. The metal was warm again. Alolan pulled it away from her throat and stared at its worn surface. For years she had thought herself pathetic for loving a man who could never love her back. Now she understood that humiliation had been built on a lie. He had seen her. He had wanted her. And still, he had allowed her to believe she meant nothing. A soft knock came at her door. Eloan? Valerian. Her body reacted before her mind did, 3 centuries of devotion recognizing his voice with cruel familiarity. She did not answer. Thora said you never delivered the medicine. Silence. The door remained closed. Valerian did not enter, though no lock in the palace could have kept the Alpha King out. Are you unwell? He asked. Eloan looked around the room that had held her waiting for longer than most kingdoms survived. Something inside her became strangely calm. No, Your Majesty. There was a pause. Open the door. Once, she would have obeyed immediately. I am tired. Eloan. Good night, Your Majesty. The silence beyond the door lasted so long that she imagined him standing there with the same unreadable expression he had worn through centuries of almost moments. Finally, his footsteps faded. Eloan waited until she could no longer hear them. Then she rose. She removed the palace insignia from her dress and placed it carefully on the table. She packed no jewels because she owned none. She took warm clothes, a little money, the carved bird, and the moon-silver pendant she could not bring herself to abandon. Before dawn, the corridors were nearly empty. Eloan walked through the eastern gallery, past portraits of generations she had outlived, and into the great hall. The Luna throne stood beside Valerian's throne in the darkness, empty as always. For 300 years, Eloan had looked at that chair and wondered which extraordinary woman would someday be worthy of sitting beside him. She stopped now only long enough to understand the cruelty of the question. Then she turned away. When the first servants began lighting the palace lamps, Eloan was already beyond the outer gates. For the first time in 300 years, she was not waiting for the Alpha King to choose her. Eloan had traveled less than 5 miles when the bond she had never known existed began to hurt. It was not a wound, but a deep pressure beneath her ribs, as though an invisible thread stretched behind her toward the palace and refused to break. She stopped beside the old northern road and pressed a hand to her chest. For one frightened moment, she nearly turned back. Then she remembered Valerian saying he had known for 300 years. Eloan kept walking. At the palace, Valerian felt her departure differently. He was standing before the moonstone when pain struck hard enough to make him grip the edge of its pedestal. A second fracture appeared across the silver-white surface. Morkan stared at it. Where is she? Valerian was already moving. He found Eloan's room empty, her palace insignia resting neatly on the table. That small piece of silver frightened him more than any threat to his crown ever had. She had not been taken. She had chosen to leave. By midday, Eloan reached an abandoned watch cottage near the edge of the royal forest. She had barely set down her bag when hoofbeats approached. She knew who it was before she opened the door. Valerian dismounted alone. He wore black armor beneath his heavy cloak, but he had left his guards behind. Even his sword remained sheathed as he stopped several feet from her. Come home. Eloan almost laughed at the word. Was it ever my home? His expression changed. For 300 years. For 300 years, it was the place where I waited for someone who already knew why I was waiting. Valerian went still. The truth passed between them without another word. You heard us. Enough. Eloan, there are things you do not understand. Then explain them. He looked toward the trees as though the answer might cost him something unbearable. Before I took the crown, the royal oracle gave me a prophecy. I was told that if I claimed the Omega bound to my soul, the crown would fall and the kingdom would follow. Eloan stared at him. And you believed that Omega was me? I knew it was you. The quiet certainty hurt more than she expected. From when? From the beginning. She closed her eyes. 300 years collapsed into 4 words. So you knew when I first came to the palace? Yes. You knew when other alphas tried to court me? Yes. You stopped them. Valerian did not deny it. I could not claim you, but I could not send you unknowingly into another bond either. Eloan looked at him in disbelief. Did it ever occur to you to tell me? And give you what choice? To bind yourself to me and risk thousands of lives, or spend the rest of your life believing their deaths would be your fault? It was still my choice. I was king. And I was the person whose life you were deciding. The words silenced him. Aloan had imagined this moment in countless forms during the walk from the palace. She had expected rage. Instead, grief settled over her with terrible clarity. I spent centuries wondering what was wrong with me, she said. I watched women enter that court wearing jewels worth more than everything I owned, and every time you looked through me, I thought I understood. I was an omega. A servant. Someone useful enough to keep near you but never worthy enough to stand beside you. You were never unworthy. You let me believe I was. Valerian's face tightened. I thought hatred would be easier for you than mourning a future we could never have. I did not hate you. Her voice softened, and that seemed to hurt him more. That was the problem. He took one step toward her. The pressure beneath Aloan's ribs immediately eased. She noticed. So did he. The bond is reacting to the distance, Valerian said. Then let it. The moonstone cracked again when you left. Aloan searched his face. So that is why you came? No, the answer came too quickly to be political. I came because you were gone. For one dangerous heartbeat, the woman who had loved him for 3 centuries wanted to surrender to those words. Then she remembered the empty throne, the unanswered questions, and every year she had blamed herself for his silence. I am still gone. Valerian's eyes darkened with pain, but he did not command her. The palace is safer. I am done living where you decide I should be. He stood before her with enough authority to summon armies, yet for once there was nothing his power could give him. Aloan stepped inside the cottage. If you want me to return, then someday you will have to tell me everything. Not the truth you think I can survive. Everything. She closed the door gently. Valerian remained outside for a long time. When he finally returned to the palace alone, another thin fracture had appeared in the moonstone. Valerian returned to the palace without Aloan, and by sunset the entire royal court knew something had gone terribly wrong. The moonstone had developed another fracture, wider than the others, and a faint silver shimmer that had surrounded the palace for centuries now flickered along the outer towers. Valerian stood before the stone with Morkant and the senior council, listening as every advisor offered the same solution in different words. Bring the Omega back. No, Valerian said. Morkant's expression tightened. Your Majesty, whatever happened between you and Aloan is no longer private. The barrier is weakening. I am aware. Then command her return. Valerian looked at the newest crack. Only hours earlier, he might have done exactly that. He could have sent royal guards to the cottage. He could have invoked ancient alpha law. He could have told himself that one woman's freedom was a reasonable price for the safety of thousands. That was how he had justified the first decision 300 years ago. She stays where she chooses, he said. Several counselors exchanged startled looks. Morkant stepped closer. You would risk the kingdom for an Omega's wounded feelings? Valerian turned slowly. You will not reduce 300 years of her life to wounded feelings. The chamber fell silent. Morkant studied him, then glanced toward the moonstone. Then the consequences belong to you. Valerian already knew that. For 3 centuries, he had believed suffering quietly made his choice honorable. Now he understood how convenient that belief had been. He had suffered, yes. But Aloan had suffered without even knowing why. At the cottage, Aloan discovered something equally difficult to understand. Freedom was quiet. There were no palace bells ordering her hours, no servants searching for her remedies, no courtiers passing her without seeing her. She prepared her own supper and sat beside the small window while darkness settled beyond the trees. The ache beneath her ribs remained, but she refused to fear it. For the first time in longer than she could remember, tomorrow belonged only to her. Yet Valerian's confession followed her into the silence. He had loved her. She could finally admit that now. His strange protection, the interrupted courtships, the empty Luna throne, the way his attention had always found her in crowded rooms. The realization did not erase her anger. It made forgiveness more complicated. A man could love someone and still wrong her. By morning, riders appeared on the road. Aloan recognized the royal colors and stepped outside, expecting Valerian. He was not among them. A council officer dismounted and bowed stiffly. Aloan, by order of the royal council, you are required to return to the palace. Her stomach tightened. Did the king issue that order? The officer hesitated. The council has acted under emergency authority. The moon barrier continues to weaken in your absence. Aloan stared at him. You believe I caused it? The evidence is difficult to ignore. Behind the officer, another rider carried a sealed document bearing Morkant's mark. Aloan suddenly understood how quickly uncertainty could become accusation. And what happens when I return? The council intends to place you near the moonstone until the barrier stabilizes. Not invited home. Contained. Aloan's hand closed around her pendant. No, the officer looked uncomfortable. I am authorized to escort you. And I am refusing. Before he could answer, hoofbeats sounded behind them. Valerian appeared on the road, riding alone again. He dismounted and walked directly between Aloan and the council riders. Return to the palace, he ordered. The officer swallowed. Your Majesty, the council believes she must be secured. Aloan is not a royal possession. Morkant's sealed order remained visible in the rider's hand. Valerian noticed it. Something cold entered his expression. Tell the council that any decision concerning her confinement requires my authority. The riders withdrew. Aloan watched until they disappeared among the trees. You could have ordered me back yourself, she said. Valerian faced her. Yes. Why did you not? He was silent for a moment. Because I finally heard what you said. The simplicity of the answer unsettled her. The barrier is failing. Yes. Your council thinks I am responsible. Yes. And you are still letting me stay? Pain crossed his face, but he nodded. If I bring you back against your will, then I have learned nothing. Aloan looked at the man she had loved for 3 centuries and saw something she had never seen before. Not the Alpha King yielding his authority. A man questioning whether he had ever understood what protection truly meant. She was not ready to forgive him. But for the first time since leaving, she could imagine that change might be possible. Valerian turned toward his horse. I will stop the council from coming again. Valerian. He paused. It was the first time since leaving that she had spoken his name without anger. Thank you. He looked back, and neither of them noticed the faint silver glow spreading across Aloan's pendant. Hours later, inside the palace, Morkant stood before the fractured moonstone as the council demanded answers. The Omega left, one elder said. The barrier weakened. What more proof do we require? Morkant rested his hand on the sealed prophecy ledger. None. And with that single answer, fear became certainty. Before nightfall, the royal council issued a formal decree declaring Aloan's absence a threat to the crown. The decree reached Aloan before sunrise, bearing the royal seal beneath words that named her absence a danger to the crown. She read it twice at the cottage table, then placed it beside the untouched breakfast she no longer wanted. Valerian had promised the council would not come again, but this was worse than writers. A decree turned fear into law. By noon, Aloan could already imagine how the story would spread beyond the palace. The barrier had weakened. The Omega had fled. Therefore, the Omega must be the cause. She touched the moon-silver pendant at her throat and felt warmth pulse beneath her fingers. This time, the glow did not disappear. A pale line appeared across the metal, so faint she thought she had imagined it. Then someone knocked. Aloan rose cautiously, but the voice outside belonged to Thora. Open the door before these old knees decide 3 miles through the forest was enough loyalty for one lifetime. Alolan opened it immediately. Thora entered carrying a leather satchel and looked at the decree. So Morkant moved faster than I expected. You knew? I knew he would need someone to blame. Thora's eyes fell to the pendant. Her expression changed. It is glowing. It started last night. Thora closed the shutters, then took an old cloth bundle from her satchel. Inside was a narrow journal, its pages yellowed with age. The woman who gave you that pendant was my predecessor's teacher. She served as a royal healer during Valerian's coronation. Alolan stared at her. 300 years ago? Thora nodded. She was present the night the original prophecy was spoken. The room seemed suddenly too small. Why did she never tell me? Perhaps she was afraid. Perhaps she did not know enough. But she left instructions that the pendant was never to leave your possession. Alolan lifted the silver disc toward the window. There is something appearing on it. Thora opened the shutters. Moonsilver responded strangely even to weak daylight. As Alolan tilted it, faded markings emerged around the rim. Not decoration. Words. Thora leaned closer. Can you read them? Alolan whispered. Thora traced the ancient lettering without touching it. The crown that denies her, she stopped. Alolan's heartbeat quickened. That is not the prophecy Valerian told me. No, the official prophecy had warned that claiming the Omega bound to his soul would cause the crown to fall. This inscription appeared to say something else entirely. There must be more, Alolan said. There was, Thora replied. The coronation records were sealed inside the Royal Moon Archive after the old oracle died. Only the king can authorize them opened. Alolan looked toward the distant palace towers visible between the trees. For 300 years, she had believed Valerian's silence proved she was unworthy. Then she learned he had loved her and believed his love endangered the kingdom. Now even that explanation had begun to fracture. If the prophecy was wrong, she whispered. Thora corrected her softly. Or changed. The possibility struck deeper. Someone might not merely have misunderstood their fate. Someone might have shaped it. Hoofbeats sounded outside. Thora immediately closed the journal. Through the window, Alolan saw royal riders approaching along the road. The council? She asked. Not this time, Thora said. Morkant's personal guard. Alolan understood. The decree had not been written to bring her home. It had been written to make resistance look like guilt. There is another path behind the cottage, Thora said. It reaches the old healer's road. Alolan looked at the back door, then at the pendant in her hand. Days earlier, she would have run. She had spent 300 years accepting whatever truth people with greater authority allowed her to have. Valerian had decided what she should know. The oracle had decided what the kingdom should believe. The council had now decided what her absence meant. She was finished letting other people define her life. No, Alolan said. Thora frowned. No? Alolan placed the pendant around her neck and gathered the journal. I am not disappearing into another forest while Morkant tells the kingdom why I ran. Then what are you going to do? Alolan looked toward the palace. Fear remained, but beneath it was something stronger. Purpose. I am going back. Thora searched her face. The council wants to confine you. Then they can explain why in front of their king. And Morkant? Alolan closed her hand around the pendant. He can explain why a relic from Valerian's coronation carries words that do not exist in his prophecy. Hours later, Valerian stood before the fractured moonstone when the great doors opened. Every counselor turned. Alolan entered beside Thora, not escorted, not captured, and not bowing her head. Valerian stared at her in disbelief. Morkant went pale when he saw the silver pendant glowing against her dress. Alolan stopped before the council and looked directly at the Alpha King. Open the Royal Moon Archive, she said. Because someone lied to us 300 years ago. Open the Royal Moon Archive, Eloan repeated, and Morkant's silence became the loudest answer in the chamber. The counselors shifted uneasily beneath the silver light of the fractured moonstone. Valerian descended from the raised platform, his gaze moving from Eloan's face to the glowing pendant at her throat. "Where did you get that?" "I have worn it for nearly 300 years. She removed the pendant and held it toward him. "I simply never knew what it carried." Thora opened the old journal beside her. The pendant came from a healer present at His Majesty's coronation. The inscription appears to preserve part of the prophecy spoken that night. Morkant recovered first. "Appears to preserve," he said. "We are discussing a damaged trinket and the memories of people dead for centuries." Eloan looked directly at him. "Then opening the archive should prove you right." A murmur passed through the council. Morkant's expression remained composed, but Eloan saw his fingers tighten around the edge of his robe. The Moon Archive was sealed for a reason. Ancient records cannot be disturbed every time a frightened Omega misunderstands an inscription. 300 years earlier, those words might have made Eloan lower her head. Now she stepped forward. "You declared me a threat to the crown without allowing me to stand before this council. You sent your guards after me. And now the moment I bring evidence that contradicts you, I am merely frightened?" "Eloan," one elder warned. "You are addressing the royal oracle. And he is addressing the woman his decree condemned." The chamber went still. Valerian looked at Morkant. "Why did you send your personal guard after her?" "Because you refused to act while the barrier failed. That was not your decision to make. Neither is opening the archive." Morkant's answer came too quickly. Valerian's eyes narrowed. "Explain." Morkant turned toward the council. "The records inside are protected by laws older than this reign. Their seals preserve prophecies that could destabilize every pack if misunderstood." "Then let us understand them correctly," Valerian said. Morkant's composure finally cracked. "Your Majesty, you would endanger the legitimacy of your own crown for her?" Eloan felt the old wound inside her tighten. There it was again. Crown or Omega? Kingdom or Eloan? The same choice that had shaped 3 centuries. But Valerian did not look at her when he answered. He looked at the empty Luna throne beside his own. "I have already spent 300 years trusting secrecy because I believed secrecy protected my people." His voice carried through the hall. "I will not spend another day protecting a truth I have never been permitted to examine." Morkant went pale. "The archive remains sealed." Valerian turned toward the royal guards. "Open it." The council descended into shocked whispers as they moved toward the ancient doors behind the moonstone. Morkant suddenly stepped between them. "Stop." Everyone froze. He looked at Valerian, then at Eloan's pendant. "You do not know what you are doing." "Then tell me," Valerian said. Morkant said nothing. Valerian's expression changed, and Eloan saw the moment suspicion became something darker. "Open the archive." The guards reached the doors. Before they could touch them, Morkant pressed his palm against the oracle seal embedded between the handles. Silver light flashed across the chamber. The seal fractured. A collective gasp rose from the council. Morkant staggered backward as ancient markings appeared beneath the broken surface. He had not opened the archive. He had tried to destroy its seal. Valerian stared at him. "What is inside that you fear more than your king?" Morkant's face had lost all color. "Something that should have remained buried." Eloan's pendant grew suddenly hot. She raised it instinctively, and the moonstone answered with a pulse of silver light. The markings on the archive doors began glowing in the same rhythm. Valerian stepped toward them. The light weakened. Eloan moved closer. It brightened again. "It needs both of you," Thora whispered. Valerian looked at Eloan, but he did not reach for her. Even now, with the kingdom waiting, he left the distance between them untouched. "Your choice," he said. Those 2 words carried more weight than any command he had ever given her. Eloan crossed the remaining space and placed her palm against the seal. Valerian placed his hand beside hers. The bond beneath her ribs surged, not painfully, but with recognition. Silver light raced through the ancient doors, across the moonstone, and into the pendant. The archive opened. Inside, untouched by 3 centuries, stood a single stone tablet covered in luminous script. Morkant closed his eyes. Eloan stared at the first line as ancient words slowly became readable. Then her breath caught. The sentence did not begin with a warning about an omega destroying the crown. It began with the crown denying its true Luna. The first line of the prophecy erased 300 years of certainty in a single breath. Eloan stood beside Valerian before the glowing stone tablet while silver light moved through letters hidden from the kingdom for centuries. Thora stepped closer, reading the ancient script aloud. The king's true omega shall not destroy the crown. The crown that denies her shall destroy itself. No one spoke. Valerian's hand slowly left the archive seal. His face had become unreadable, but Eloan saw the shock beneath the stillness. Read the rest, he said. Thora continued. The prophecy described a true Luna whose bond would strengthen the royal moon barrier, joining crown and pack beneath one protected line. But if the crown denied that bond out of fear, the barrier would weaken with each passing generation until the kingdom faced the very collapse it had tried to prevent. Eloan looked toward the moonstone. Its fractures were not proof that she was dangerous. They were proof of 3 centuries spent denying what she was. No, Valerian whispered. He turned to Morkant. The prophecy I was given said claiming her would make the crown fall. Morkant remained silent. Answer me. The command echoed through the chamber. Morkant finally raised his eyes. The prophecy was altered before you received it. A counselor recoiled. By whom? My predecessor. Morkant paused. And by those who supported him. Eloan felt strangely calm. Why? Morkant looked at her, and for the first time there was no pretense of sympathy in his expression. Because 300 years ago this kingdom had barely survived a pack war. Noble houses were holding the crown together. Then an ancient prophecy declared that a lowborn omega would become the true Luna and stand beside the king. Do you imagine those houses would have accepted that peacefully? So you lied, Eloan said. We preserved order. You preserved power, Thora replied. Morkant's jaw tightened. Sometimes they are the same thing. Valerian stared at the tablet as if it were passing judgment on him. Eloan understood what he was seeing. Every time he had sent another alpha away. Every year he had left the Luna throne empty. Every moment he had forced himself not to reach for her. He had believed those choices were sacrifices made for his people. Instead, every sacrifice had fed the danger he feared. You knew, Valerian said to Morkant. You personally knew the prophecy was false. I inherited the truth with my office. And you watched the barrier weaken. Changing course after centuries would have exposed the oracle order and destabilized the crown. Valerian gave a quiet, disbelieving laugh that contained no humor. So when the evidence began proving the lie, you blamed Eloan. Morkant did not answer. He did not need to. Eloan looked down at her pendant. Suddenly she remembered the healer who had given it to her so long ago, an elderly woman whose final words Eloan had nearly forgotten. Keep this, little one. Some truths survive only because someone refuses to throw them away. The pendant had never been worthless. Neither had she. Her eyes moved to the empty Luna throne beyond the archive doors. For centuries she had watched noble women pass it and wondered what they possessed that she lacked. Bloodline. Wealth. Beauty. Power. She had spent 300 years measuring herself against women Valerian had never intended to choose. Eloan. Valerian's voice was unsteady. She turned toward him. The Alpha King who had frightened armies now looked almost lost. I thought I was saving them, he said. I know. He seemed startled by her answer. That does not make what happened to me disappear. His eyes closed briefly. I know that too. She believed him. That was what made the grief so complicated. Valerian had been deceived. But Alolan had still been denied the truth by his choice. Morkant had created the lie. Valerian had chosen silence. Both truths could exist together. 300 years, Valerian murmured. His gaze moved over the cracked moonstone. Every year I refused you, I was weakening the barrier. And every year you refused me, Alolan said softly, I thought it was because I was not enough. He looked at her with visible pain. You were always enough. Tears finally gathered in her eyes, but her voice remained steady. I needed to know that 300 years ago. Valerian did not reach for her. Perhaps once he would have. Now he understood that even comfort required permission. Behind them, the moonstone suddenly pulsed. Silver light traveled through every fracture, not sealing them, but illuminating them. The same light spread through Alolan's pendant and across the ancient prophecy. A council elder whispered, the barrier is responding to the truth. Valerian looked around at the gathered council. Something settled into his expression. Not relief. Decision. For 3 centuries, he said, this kingdom lived beneath a prophecy its own crown never questioned. Morkant stepped forward. Your Majesty, consider what public disclosure will do. Noble houses will lose faith. The oracle order will fall. Your own legitimacy may be challenged. Then let it be challenged. Morkant stared at him. Valerian turned toward Alolan. I cannot return what was taken from you. His gaze dropped briefly to her pendant before meeting her eyes again. But I can make certain the lie takes nothing else. Alolan understood what he intended. You are going to tell them. Everyone. Even if it costs you the throne? Valerian looked toward the crown resting above his royal seat, then toward the empty chair beside it. I once gave up the truth because I was afraid of losing my kingdom. His voice softened. I will not make that choice twice. Outside the archive, the palace bells began ringing as the council summoned representatives from every pack. By nightfall, the kingdom would learn that its most sacred prophecy had been altered. And for the first time in 300 years, Valerian would stand before his people with nothing left between Alolan and the truth. By nightfall, every pack representative in the kingdom was standing beneath the same roof where Alolan had spent 3 centuries being overlooked. She stood near the center of the royal hall beside Thora, wearing the same simple dress she had returned in, while nobles filled the galleries and counselors gathered beneath the fractured moonstone. Valerian entered wearing black royal armor and the crimson cloak of the crown. No one spoke as he approached his throne. The Luna throne beside it remained empty. Morkant stood under guard near the council, stripped of his oracle insignia but otherwise unharmed. Valerian did not sit. 300 years ago, this kingdom received a prophecy concerning its future Luna, he said. His voice carried through the chamber. That prophecy was altered. Shock moved through the crowd. Valerian waited until silence returned. I was told that claiming my true mate would destroy the crown and endanger every pack under my protection. I believed it. I built 3 centuries of decisions upon it. His eyes found Alolan. And because I believed it, I denied the woman I knew was my mate. Whispers erupted. Heads turned toward her. Alolan felt hundreds of eyes finally seeing the Omega they had passed without notice for generations. Once, she had dreamed of such recognition. Now she understood that being seen by a crowd could never determine her worth. Valerian continued. The original prophecy said the opposite. Denying the true Luna was the danger. Our moon barrier weakened not because Alolan left me, but because the crown denied the bond for 300 years. Morkant lowered his gaze. Valerian ordered the original tablet displayed publicly and announced that no oracle would ever again possess sole authority over royal prophecy records. The council decree against Alolan was revoked. Ancient rules permitting forced confinement under disputed mate law were suspended for permanent reform. Then Valerian did something the court clearly did not expect. He stepped down from the royal platform. He stopped before Aloan, but he did not touch her. Morkant inherited a lie, he said quietly, though the hall remained silent enough for everyone to hear. But my silence was my decision. I thought protecting you meant carrying the burden alone. I was wrong. Aloan's throat tightened. You were deceived too. Yes. Valerian did not hide behind the answer. And I still chose for you. 300 years of longing seemed to stand between them. I cannot ask you to forget that. He glanced toward the Luna throne. Aloan followed his gaze. For centuries, that empty chair had represented everything she believed she lacked. Now the entire kingdom knew it had remained empty because Valerian had already known who his mate was. Aloan, he said, the prophecy recognizes you as my true mate. The crown recognizes you as its rightful Luna. A ripple moved through the hall. Valerian raised one hand, silencing it. But recognition is not ownership. He removed the royal mate insignia from his cloak and placed it on the table beside them rather than offering it to her. No bond will be claimed tonight. No title will be placed upon you unless you choose it. Tears blurred Aloan's vision. Valerian looked at her as though committing every feature to memory. Then he spoke the words she had heard from him countless times. For 300 years, I told you to stay where I knew you were safe. His voice softened. I will never say that to you again. Aloan remembered palace corridors, interrupted courtships, unanswered questions, and the cottage door closing between them. Valerian took one step backward. Go wherever you choose. If you ever return, let it be because you wanted to. He moved aside. A clear path opened from Aloan to the great doors. No guard stopped her. No counselor spoke. Even the bond seemed quiet, waiting. Aloan looked at the Luna throne one last time. Then she walked away from it. A tremor of surprise moved through the hall. Valerian did not call her name. He did not follow. Aloan reached the great doors and stepped beyond them into the long gallery. For several moments, she simply stood there. She had imagined being chosen by Valerian for centuries. She had never imagined how it would feel to choose herself first. The realization was peaceful. She did not need the throne behind her. She did not need the court's approval. She did not even need the mate bond to tell her what she was worth. Only then did she understand what she wanted. Aloan turned around. Valerian was still standing exactly where she had left him when she returned to the hall. His expression changed, but he remained still. She crossed the distance between them willingly. I am not ready to sit on that throne, she said. Then it stays empty. I cannot give you back the woman who waited for you without questions. I am not asking for her. Aloan searched his face. And I cannot promise forgiveness will happen quickly. Then I will not hurry it. She let the silence settle. But I would like to know who we might become without the lie. Valerian's eyes closed for one brief, overwhelmed moment. When he opened them, he held out his hand but stopped before touching hers. Aloan looked at it. Then she placed her hand in his. Behind them, silver light spread through the moonstone. The fractures remained visible, but their edges began to glow rather than deepen, like scars that no longer threatened to break apart. The Luna throne remained empty that night. Aloan preferred it that way. After 300 years of waiting to be chosen, her new life began with something far more important. She finally had the freedom to choose.